welcome to Shift
Thank you very
Happen.
much. Yeah, I must begin by saying what a brilliant name that is, and so well done. I don't know if that's your invention or someone else's, but it's really very brilliant.
Actually, it came from playing around with words and, of course, ideas that friends had sent. And then, of course, I thought, ooh, this is mega brilliant, and found out that there are other podcasts with the same name, but that's okay. I'm already ranking pretty high up, so I'm fine. I'm fine. Yeah, Daisy, so nice that we reconnected and that we are now spending time together here on Shift Happens. I was, of course, fascinated and humbled and especially honored to have you here on this podcast after reading your biography, your CV, and all these influential marks that you've left in your journalistic and media career. So as the former vice president and editor-in-chief of Radio Free Europe, we will hear later what the shift of leaving this world meant for you and why you've done it. But before we get there, I wanted to ask you a few questions. What is your current state of mind?
Wow, what an interesting question to begin with. I would say my current state of mind is a peaceful one, a happy one, and perhaps most importantly, a very interesting one. So I wake up with the knowledge that every day is going to be different. There are many component parts to my day, and that makes it very interesting for me.
Great. How would you describe your idea of perfect happiness?
Perfect happiness is, in fact, there's a quote that I like a lot that actually is a definition of perfect happiness. And I think about it a lot because when I first encountered it, it struck me as unusual. And as time goes by, I realize how close it is to a perfect definition of happiness. It's attributed to Gandhi. I assume that that is true. And it is that happiness is when what you say, what you think, and what you do are in harmony. And I think that means that you have no internal dissonance, that regardless of whether you are doing great things or small things, that the picture is harmonious, both in terms of how you think about it, you talk about it, and in terms of what you do. So I think that happiness in the 21st century can be portrayed as something akin to joy or exuberance. In fact, I think it's something simpler. It is knowing who you are and what you're about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful quote. I agree. Which living person do you most admire?
Another excellent question. I would say I accept this in the spirit of the political season that we're in. I'm taking equal inspiration at the moment from Hillary Clinton and Kamala Harris. These are two bookends of what I think many American women hope will be a historic moment in the United States where we can finally get to the point where we can elect a woman into the highest office. And I think they're both very inspirational because of what they have gone through personally, also because of their incredible dedication to public service, their obvious intelligence and grit. So I like to think of them in terms of a package deal.
Mhm, mhm.
It took one for the other to happen.
Yeah, true, true. Fingers crossed. So, speaking of incredible women, we can turn to you now. And you have left your position about 2 years ago.
That's
And
correct.
it would be it's just great if you explain again what not only what your position was, but your journalistic media journey and what led you to refocus and make a decision to take your life to a next phase.
Sure, I'm happy to do that. So I'm one of those people who has been in one industry my entire working life. So I have always been a journalist. But my interest and my academic background was in Russian studies. So I was in college at a time when a lot was changing in Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union. And it was an opportunity to go to a part of the world that I had always been fascinated by, and experience something firsthand, really live history. And it was a remarkable time for young journalists. I was very lucky to be able to live in Russia and work for newspapers there. And that really shaped my entire life and my entire career. I eventually did leave Russia because I had had a baby and wanted to live maybe a slightly quieter life. Russia is a wonderful place to live when you are young and fearless. But once I had someone that I needed to take care of, I decided to move outside of Russia, and I settled in Prague in the Czech Republic, which is the headquarters of Radio Free Europe, and I got a job with that organization. Very briefly, Radio Free Europe provides journalism to some of the most dangerous and hostile countries to be a journalist. That's Russia, Belarus, Afghanistan, Iran. It really is a remarkable organization. And so I was very lucky to get a job working there. I worked there for a long time, over 20 years. And for a
Wow.
lot of that time, I was a reporter and an editor. And then in I would say the final 7 years there, I progressed very quickly through a series of jobs and promotions. I think I may have had 5 or 6 promotions in the course of 5 or 6 years,
Wow.
which I say not because I'm bragging about it, but because I think that that's if there's a warning takeaway, it is to beware rapid successional promotions because you are on a constant learning curve and a constant instability curve that can be very kind of wearing after a while. So I was the director of a Russian language television channel, did a couple of other managerial jobs, eventually became acting president of the entire company, and then settled into my final permanent position as editor in chief and vice president.
That's interesting that you that the quick promotions is a warning sign. I mean, usually, right, this is what everybody is after, to climb up the ladder even quicker and quicker. So that's such an interesting takeaway and experience.
Well, I remember very distinctly at the time that it began, when I was offered my very first promotion, I had just returned from a reporting trip to Ukraine. This was before the war, but after the significant public protests that had been there. And there was nothing I loved more than being outside, being in the country, talking to people, reporting on the ground is a dose of oxygen like nothing else. And so I
Mhm.
came back feeling very happy and excited about the trip I had taken. And it was at that precise moment that I was offered the opportunity to go into management. Sorry, I'm going to interrupt for 1 second because my earbuds just conked out. Can you
Oh,
still hear me?
I can hear you, yeah. Oh, no, I
Um,
can't. Oh, yeah.
Now you can hear
Yeah, yeah,
me?
yeah, 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 yeah. Now it's better, yeah.
Okay, I apologize for that there. So that was the moment that I was offered a promotion, and my first response, my automatic response was no, thank you, because I'm really very happy doing what I'm doing. And then somehow the ambition got to me, and so I did make the switch. And I think about that moment very often, or I have thought about it very often in the years since, because that was
Mhm.
the first shift, and we'll talk about the second shift later, I guess.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, so the second shift is that you left this high-ranking position, and that it was a decision. And what I find most striking, that you said that you left with really no plan. And one of the good things, of course, was that you left, and you've been a role model for younger women in your industry, and you basically, prepared the way for them. So no, it was the time for them to pick up the torch and move forward. But I really thought it was so striking to leave all you've created because you needed something new and something different, and with no plan. Amazing.
It could not have been otherwise. The years that I spent as editor-in-chief, I was leading a news division that in total was about 2,000 people, in a variety of different countries, working under a variety of different circumstances. But that period of time coincided with real geopolitical chaos
Mm.
in a lot of the places where we worked, and globally. It coincided with COVID. It coincided with the return of Taliban rule in Afghanistan.
Mhm.
It coincided with the start of the war in Ukraine.
Mm.
And it also coincided with a very serious ratcheting up of pressure against journalists in a lot of the countries where we worked. We were forced to close our operations inside Russia, inside Afghanistan, inside Belarus, and always make accommodations for where could our journalists work next. How were we going to ensure that our audiences in those countries were going to get continued access to the news and information that they really desperately needed?
Mm.
So it became a fight and a race that had real human consequences. We lost, unfortunately, the lives of some of our journalists. We had other journalists who were put in jail. You may have recently heard about the prisoner swap in Russia.
Mhm.
One of the journalists who was released was a journalist for Radio Free Europe.
Mhm.
Um, so it was a very high stakes game,
Mhm.
and it was the pressure was immense on the entire organization, myself
Mhm.
included. And on a personal note, I was also going through menopause. My only child had left for university, and he was going through a gender transition that included the start of hormone therapy. So an extremely emotional time for him and an extremely emotional time for us as a family, to have him living in a different country on this journey on his own. So I say these things not because I think they're unusual or I really went through something. I think that women go through these types of things a lot.
Yes.
But it's worth saying out loud.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you for that. It's, yeah, as you said, it is happening all the time and to so many families, and to be outspoken about it and to share also the vulnerability that comes with it. Yeah. And that we cannot always balance it all so easily because, yeah, life and in this case, you know, you the experience with the world changing so rapidly and becoming so a dangerous place again. Yeah. And then at the same time going through these changes and vulnerability in your own family and in yourself. I mean, how much more can there be? Yeah, that's a lot. So then you thought stop, or did it almost feel like now it's time for something that I have been thinking about for a longer time anyway, but it didn't really have the space to come up, like, you know, this wanting to change and wanting to refocus?
Yeah, I think I had been thinking about it for a while, and I realized I only partially answered your previous question about stepping down with no plan. I do believe it couldn't have been otherwise because it was a job that consumed you body and soul, and it had to be that way. I would not have been able to live with myself in good conscience if I had spent even a minute of my working day managing a transition to something else. I needed to stay fully focused on my job. And I also knew that in order to figure out what I wanted to do next, I would need time. I needed a break. So I first discussed my departure probably about a year before I left. And then we very slowly managed the offboarding. And then it went from crazy chaos and busyness to nothing
How was that?
overnight. It was wonderful, and it's also very scary. It is scary not to know what you're going to do next, but after you've had any period of working very intensely, it is nice to wake up in the morning and not have anything more to do than read a book or take a walk. I think everyone deserves to have those periods of time when they can reset. Sometimes a vacation is not enough to do things like that. And yeah, and with that began a period of exploration. And it wasn't a determined path. It was really a wander. And that is what it has been since then. And that's why I said in this case, it's sort of shift still happening, not shift has happened.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I know for some who are leaving a professional routine wherever it stands, and then go and end this and start a new path, it can always also be connected with a bit of a nosedive almost, or even depression, yeah, because it is Yeah, when you're functioning in a certain system, you wrote factory setting, that is every day the same and the pressure is really high and so on and so forth. But it also somehow has us in its claws. So when this suddenly breaks off, even though we are freed, it also takes some time to use this new freedom um, in a positive way. And I guess, yes, what you said, that you really need to take time. Are you still in Prague?
I am still in Prague. This is a city where I've lived for more than 20 years. I really love it.
Yeah.
My kid is back from college and is living here, so I want to stay here as long as he is here.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I can't think of a nicer place to live, so I'm very happy.
So, what is your, have you already had kind of an outcome of your reflections about this new act or second act or third act in your life? Like what lies ahead for you?
I think so. And here's what I would say. Having left with no plan in mind, I realized pretty quickly I'd better have a plan in mind. How long can this go on? But it was a bit too early to go through the exercises that I think people are often encouraged to really lay down a game plan for themselves. So I've listened to countless podcasts, talked to innumerable people in an attempt to find my way forward. And all of that has been enormously helpful. But what became very clear to me with time is that there was not going to be an easy solution. There was not going to be a magic idea that appeared out of nowhere that would signify to me, this is your natural next step.
Mm-hmm.
And I keep coming back to the word wander because that is what I think ultimately proved to be the goal. The goal is the wandering. So I have done a lot of really different, interesting things over the past 2 years, all of which have been unforgettable, none of which I would describe as the ultimate goal. And at the moment, I have sort of suspended conversation about an ultimate goal. I think that, in fact, the point may be this exploration that I'm going through now.
Mm-hmm. Can you share 2 or 3 experiences of your wandering that were most impactful and maybe surprising and impactful? Surprising that they were so impactful.
The very first thing I did upon leaving my job was to begin reading books every morning and to begin handwriting letters to my friends. And so I didn't abandon social media or electronic communication, but when it came to communicating with friends, I wanted to adopt a slower pace. And I would heartily recommend to anyone who really is going through a stressful period to keep a journal or to write letters and to do it by hand. The pace with which you can write a letter with your hand is slow, it's soothing, it's meditative, it's extremely relaxing. And if you think about it yourself, what could be more delightful than getting something in the mail? It really is like a little treasure, especially now that it is.
Yes.
It's relatively rare. It doesn't happen so much.
Mm-hmm.
So in that first year, I realized that one of the things that I had lost in the course of a very busy career was not only connection to family members who really needed me in the case of my kid, my husband, and others, but my friends. I'm a very lucky person in the sense that I've accumulated extraordinary friends over the course of my life. We all live in different places, as is often the case, and I had really let that slip. Friendships need work, they need to be maintained and invested in, and that was something that I simply hadn't had time for in a long time. So it was a wonderful treat for me to slowly and methodically really reconnect in a deep way with all of my friends. And for the most part, I was doing that through writing letters. So I would say that that was
Beautiful.
hugely impactful. I spent about half a year living in a very small town in the Hudson Valley in upstate New York. And the reason was that this town, which had not had a local newspaper in many years, was launching a newspaper because they were beginning to feel the effects of disinformation and community division because there was no central source of verified news. And this was a tiny town where my mother and her sisters had grown up. So it was very familiar to me as a place that I traveled to a lot when I was a child. So there was a real emotional connection going back to this town. I could still see the house where my grandmother had lived. I was able to connect with people by saying, my grandmother was the local librarian. It was a completely different way to live. And yet it was a place where I could apply some of the things that I knew and do something that was really important for a small community and really important for me. My mother was there, one of my aunts was there. So on a personal level, it was very deep, very rich. I even remember one day walking past the house where my grandmother had lived, and the doors were open because the building was being renovated. And I just walked in and asked if I could walk around. And so that is a bit like time traveling. If you go back into a house that you occupied as a child, the dimensions of the building seem different. So much is just an extraordinary, almost physical vibration that you can feel. And so I felt like that was the first opportunity that I had to reconnect with my family, but also a younger me. And it kind of brings your life full circle in a way that's very meaningful. And the last thing I'll throw in, just because it's a lark, but I recommend it for everyone, is I started playing Mahjong. And I know that Mahjong is all the rage.
I play Mahjong.
And I think we had, and it was mystifying to me. It looked so interesting. I was able, through much hard work here in Prague, to find a group of women who play Mahjong who were willing to let me come and join them and to slowly teach me. And these are a group of women who are retired, who are themselves going through really extraordinary things. And it has been such a tonic for me to have this friend group that I never would have had otherwise. And obviously to have something extremely engaging and busy to do at the same time. So if you don't play Mahjong, learn how to play it. It's a wonderful, wonderful game.
Yes, it's the best. Oh, I love it all. Thank you. And particularly the story of your 6 months in this small town. I mean, just that almost sounds it could fill a book. Just this experience of homecoming. What's the name of the newspaper?
The newspaper is called the New Pine Plains Herald, and the town is Pine Plains, New York.
The New Pine Plains Herald. Okay, great. I will look it up. So with your knowledge and these years and years of living in Russia and in Prague, I'm sure your insights must be sought after from organizations and businesses, even though, you know, Russia is, of course, at the moment a difficult topic and a difficult area. But are you interested, or I mean, is there a place for all this that you've gained and lived through and experienced throughout your professional life?
I have done some lecturing on disinformation, and it's a topic and an area that remains very interesting to me and important. It's not central to what I'm doing right now. I am currently working with an organization that does investigative reporting, and that's also been a wonderful new chapter for me because it teaches me something new, and does bring me occasionally into reporting that has to do with Russia, Ukraine, and elsewhere. So some of it is familiar and some of it is new. So it will always be a part of who I am. Next month, I'm traveling to the States, and I'm going to be reuniting for the first time with a group of women journalists who worked with me in Moscow in the 1990s. And I think that's going to be an extraordinary layer to that experience as well.
Yes. Are you in particular focusing on female colleagues, supporting young female journalists going out into the world? Is that something that you also do, or not so much yet?
Well, it's something that I have always taken very seriously, and I think being a journalist is extremely risky and dangerous in many parts of the world. Whoever you are, for women, it is so much more. So much more of a risk, and so much more makes you so much more of a target for trolling, harassment. So in my job at Radio Free Europe, I really took pains to make sure that we had training and protections in place for women journalists, and that was part of the conversation, that it was increasingly about protecting our journalists and not just our audience members. So it's something that I feel very strongly about. And I think that continues with the job that I'm doing now. Investigative reporters obviously put themselves at immense risk, immense. And I'm always going to be very dedicated to women journalists in particular who are doing that kind of dangerous work. I have been, it's interesting, Claudia, you were one of the first people that I talked to when I left Radio Free Europe at the suggestion of a mutual friend of ours. And we had a conversation about mentoring and, helping women, creating conversations between women. And that really landed with me in a big way. And so since the start of this year, I have been running a mentoring group here in Prague that is for women. I think we have a few women in their 20s, and then we will have women up through their 60s. And it is really meant to be just a community for women of various nationalities and experiences to have a safe space to get together and talk. And it has been so wonderful and such a surprising, rich source of conversation. We just had our latest meeting last night, and it was fantastic. So I have to thank you for putting that idea in my head, and but let you know that those conversations are priceless.
They are priceless, aren't they? Yes. Well, I'm so glad. That makes me super happy. How wonderful. I have to come.
Yes, you must come as our featured guest.
No. Well, we'll see. Um, so usually I ask my guests about two hacks that they share. One to how they calm down in their busy lives, and the other one how they get energized for what they are doing or what's waiting for them on the day.
When I need to calm down, which happens about 2 times a day, the thing that I find most effective is to think, what does someone else need at this moment? I think when I'm feeling a little bit of inner turmoil or feeling insecure, concerned about something, anxious about something, the most calming thing for me is to turn it around and think about someone else. So usually trying to actively run through your Rolodex of friends, family members, contacts, whomever, and think, who's going through something right now? Can I reach out to them? Just make sure that they're doing okay. And it is, I guess, to a certain degree, it's an altruistic move, but it is enormously fulfilling because it takes you out of your head,
Mhm.
and puts you in touch with someone at the right time. And so I think that that's a very useful exercise. And then in all other things, calming down and getting energized, a walk. There's nothing better than taking a really long walk.
Yes. Yes, I agree. I have to ask you one last question because I just arrived in Berlin from the States, and I've spoken to a few friends in the meantime, and there is a notion of the Ukraine war being so close and so around the corner, and I have to say, I mean, of course, I read the news and I keep up, and I support where I can. I've featured an entrepreneur, startup founder from Ukraine, and these things. But living in the U.S., just physically, one is more remote, feels more remote from it, and so it was almost difficult for me to really deeply feel this angst of this war being so close. Of course, I would like, a brief statement from you about this, since since because of your insights and also how you feel in the Czech Republic.
Certainly, you're correct. The war feels very close. It has since the beginning, and in Berlin, as in Prague, there has been a massive influx of women and children who have fled Ukraine. So it's in the Czech Republic where I live. I think this is true in Germany as well. It has been heartening to see the steps that governments and communities have taken to welcome new communities, but it changes things. We have seen energy prices go up. We have seen rent go sky high as real estate becomes less available. So you're seeing countries that are accommodating and in transition as they accept this new reality. And of course, these countries know perfectly well what it is like to be invaded or what it is like to be in conflict with Russia or other countries. That memory is not that old for
Yeah.
them, in
Mm.
fact. And so that is extremely sobering. I can relate to what you described, the feeling of helplessness, that there is something happening not that far from your doorstep. You're limited in terms of what you can do to help. To a certain degree, I feel that way about Russia too, which I know is the aggressor in this case, but also victimizes its own population in waging a war. So what I recommend to anyone is to stay informed, to stay alert to what is going on. I think that the easiest thing to do is just to turn a blind eye to things like that. But I think our obligation as global citizens is to stay aware of these things. That extends to what's happening in Gaza. It extends to any number of issues, and to always be ready to help, whether that's through charity work, whether raising awareness, whether you can do something directly, working with journalists, working with aid organizations. Everything helps, but I think that it all begins from the basis of simply being aware and not keeping yourself in a bubble. I was actually quite shocked when I was living in the United States by how many Ukrainian flags I saw, even in very small communities. That meant that people were paying attention to it. I can't speak to what's going on there now, but it was one of those issues.
In New York
It
City,
was an issue
absolutely.
where I think it was clearly an issue where the United States was engaging on a topic that was far beyond its own borders, and that was a good thing to see. Obviously, the same thing is true with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and beyond. These things are incredibly painful, but we are not citizens of our countries. We are really citizens of the world, and it's important to pay attention to those things.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you, Daisy, really, for this insight. And of course, I hope that you're going to write a book. I know it's probably like a super obvious goal, but I mean, these years must have been so incredibly rich in experiences, in very tough experiences, but probably also very humbling in human experiences. But thank you so much for sharing your time and wisdom and your shift, and all the best for your family. And it was nice to speak to you.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you so much for having these conversations. I think it's incredibly important. I did just, in thinking about this conversation and the mentoring group, I think these types of conversations and creating this kind of community is really important, because women so often are put into positions where they have to conform to a set of rules. And I think having conversations like this is a step towards setting the rules instead of conforming to them. And so thank you to you, for doing this type of work. I think it's very inspiring.
Thank you so much.